Thank you, Pastor Tyler, for the great introduction and for reading the gospel. My eyesight is fading, so I appreciate any help in that direction. I begin in the name of the one who calls us today to still pick up our cross in 2024 and to follow him. Amen. I am grateful for the invitation to be here and to have the opportunity to fellowship with brothers and sisters at Mount Zion. I have been here on several occasions for Micah events, for some activities with Breaking the Chains congregation, and for a memorial service for my friend and your brother and mine, Gerhard Fischer. And so it is good to be here on this Micah Sunday, and certainly you are welcome to come to a forum after this to talk more about Micah. But I want to thank you for your support, your participation in Micah for years, and for the justice work that we are engaged in, which really is doing the gospel and living the gospel to our neighbor and being concerned that anything that is pressing down on our neighbor needs to be lifted up, and that's what justice work is all about. But this is more than Micah Sunday. It is the second Sunday in Lent. And it is a very powerful, awesome, challenging text that we have before us today. It is Jesus saying to us that if anyone wants to follow me, let them deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow me. And what a challenge that is to all of us to ask, what does it really mean to pick up our cross in 2024? And that's what we want to struggle with for a few minutes today, but it's not going to be finished today. It's just a start, and hope that you will prayerfully struggle with, in your own life and your own Lenten journey, what it means to lift up our cross in 2024. To begin with, maybe we should say what it is not. Picking up our cross and following Jesus is not what some people may say. You may have heard somebody say, well, I just discovered that I have cancer, and I guess I will have to bear that. That's my cross on me. Or maybe somebody has said, I have a wayward son, and we simply can't do anything with him. I guess that's my cross to bear. And certainly those are challenges and burdens to seek God's help with, but those are challenges that come to people whether they are following Jesus or not. And what Jesus is talking about in this text is picking up our cross because we are following him and so close to him. And that leads us to ask once again, what does it mean to pick up our cross in 2024? And perhaps we should take a look at what it was that brought Jesus, humanly speaking, to be crucified by the religious leaders in Jerusalem back in his day. It was certainly not just a personality clash. There was a real reason why Jesus was disliked by the religious leaders and was crucified. He pushed the envelope. He reached out to people that the religious leaders said are to be shunned, to be avoided, not to be associated with at any level. What did Jesus do in his ministry? He certainly did talk with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests and the Levites. He went to the synagogue on Sabbath and taught and shared. But during the week, what he did day after day was he reached out to those who were thought to be unclean, not to be associated with, not to be touched. Consider, Jesus ate with tax collectors and prostitutes. He called a man called Matthew, a tax collector, to be one of his 12 disciples. Unthinkable, the religious leaders said, going against the purity laws that we have. Or Jesus encountered a woman about to be stoned to death because she had been caught in adultery, they said. And Jesus forgave the woman and told those who were gathered to stone her to death, let him who has never sinned cast the first stone. Jesus touched the lepers and healed them. Touching a leper made Jesus unclean according to their purity laws. He should never have even gotten that close to the lepers, but he made it a point to say to the lepers that they were loved by God, that they were a part of God's community, and he made it a point to reach out to them and to touch them. Jesus talked to a Samaritan woman in public. Weren't supposed to do that in those days. And a Samaritan, and then all of her fellow villagers came out, and he offered to them the forgiveness and the love of God as though they were important to God. And that was a no-no according to the rabbis and the Orthodox of the day. Do we get the point that Jesus received and picked up his cross precisely because he reached out to those at the margins with God's love, as though that was what he came to earth especially to communicate to those who thought they were left out, who thought that they were not included, and let them know you are loved, you are forgiven, you are, in God's eyes, important to him and a part of his family. And so if we are going to pick up our cross in 2024, need to follow Jesus and discover what it means more deeply to reach out to those who are at the margins of society and told by even leaders of our state and our nation that you don't really count, you really shouldn't be voting, you really shouldn't be a part of our community. And this is our opportunity to reach out and find those persons at the margins, let them know that they are included in God's love. And let me maybe surprise some of you. I would say to you that as a congregation, you are indeed reaching out to those at the margins. Your relationship with, and your partnership with Reformation Church in the heart of the city of Milwaukee. I saw the plaque out here that says that you have had that partnership at least since 1992. My math tells me that's 32 years ago. And that partnership is a way in which members of Mount Zion interact with members of Reformation and the people from that community. And who are they? Not only are they African Americans, they include formerly incarcerated people, they include people who are poor and are even homeless. And these are the losers who, according to the leaders in many places, don't count and shouldn't be associated with, but you do. And that is picking up your cross in 2024. Your membership and participation in Micah is reaching out to those at the edges. The very membership is reaching out to those communities that we are tempted to think are not to be associated with. After all, in Micah, we are linked with congregations that are not our denomination. We are linked with Jewish and Muslim congregations, a Buddhist congregation, as if those persons are to be associated with, and we are doing justice and trying to bring about that kind of togetherness and that kind of lifting up people from whatever it is that is pressing them down. And you might say, as some people do out there, that justice work is really political stuff, and Christians and the religious people should not be engaged. But I would remind you that Jesus made it very clear that this is an important thing that God actually expects of us. In Matthew 23:23, and this is during Holy Week, just a few days before he went to the cross, he was talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he said, "You're pretty good at observing the small rules of purity. You even tithe the mint and the cumin at your doorstep, but you neglect the weightier matters that God calls us and requires us to do," and then he names them: justice, mercy, that's forgiveness, and faithfulness and integrity. As if justice was indeed a way, doing justice is indeed a way of reaching out and loving our neighbor and saying, we care enough about you that we want you to have the same opportunities and privileges and justice that we experience day in and day out. And I could even add your association with and support of Breaking the Chains. That's a prison congregation at 30th and Fond du Lac. It is a way in which you are saying, we who support and are involved with Breaking the Chains are saying that these persons who made mistakes, like all the rest of us, are people that are loved by God, forgiven by God, and welcomed into the spiritual community and our community out there in the world. That is indeed picking up our cross and following Jesus in 2024. If we do have some children here that are still here, what this means to children is children who are in school and maybe have some classmates who are being bullied, or classmates that are a little different and strange, or classmates that don't have the clothes that most of us have. Those are the very classmates that need to be talked with, that need to be assured that you are important to all of us. And it's risky business, maybe, to reach out to such persons, but that's what Jesus is asking us to do, to take the risk of being, not going necessarily to a cross, but being misunderstood, being put down and ridiculed ourselves. I can even hear a spouse or a friend of one of you who has gone down there to Reformation Church asking, what in the world are you doing? That's not safe, and those people, but that's the level at which most of us will experience the cross. It probably, in our day and time, will not mean death, although it could, and we ought to be willing to go that far. That's what Jesus is saying. And it is that challenge to us to figure out how far we will go in picking up the cross in 2024. If I may, in closing, share a story from 1961 that still gives me courage to pick up my cross and follow Jesus in 2024. As some of you know, I was pastor of an African American congregation in Birmingham from 58 to 67, and that was still the Jim Crow period. That was the time when the civil rights movement, the justice movement, was just coming into its own. It was gaining steam. And in 1961, a white congregation in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, invited the youth of our congregation, St. Paul in Birmingham, to come and spend a Sunday evening in a fellowship meal and sharing in Tuscaloosa, some 60 miles southwest of Birmingham. Now that was the white congregation and white youth of this congregation in Tuscaloosa picking up the cross. This was taking a risk, to be sure. This is not something that was never done in 1961 in Birmingham or Tuscaloosa. And furthermore, Tuscaloosa was the hotbed of the Ku Klux Klan. And it was picking up their cross for any of our youth to accept the invitation. After all, they didn't know how they were going to really be received, and they knew that this was also the hotbed of the Ku Klux Klan. So when I brought the invitation to our youth, there were two 15-year-old girls who said, yes, we would like to go. Carolyn Freeman and Betty Wells. And so we got their parents' permission, and we went to Tuscaloosa, and we had a great evening. Spaghetti dinner, sharing of the youth, discovering that their lives were not so different, even though they never walked with each other as equals before. And they had prayer, and they had singing, it was a great evening. And on the way back, Carolyn and Betty in the back seat of the car said, you know, this is what the church really ought to be about. Crossing those lines that separate people and bringing us together. Isn't that what Jesus wants us to do? Wow, they were getting theological and almost preaching from this text. Well, it was Tuesday morning of that week that I picked the paper up off of the front porch, and there on the front page of the Birmingham morning paper was the picture of this young pastor at the congregation in Tuscaloosa that had invited us, and the story of the Ku Klux Klan taking him out at midnight to the edge of the city, beating him, and leaving him to walk back to Tuscaloosa on the railroad track after midnight. A cross burned on the lawn of the church, and a note pinned to the door that said, if another integrated youth meeting happens in this place, it will be worse next time. And before I had finished reading the article, the phone rang and a rough voice on the other end said, is this the Reverend? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, you and the two girls are next. Click. Well, I knew that I had to take this threat, which is not an idle threat, to the parents and to the two girls. And I will never forget my conversation with Carolyn Freeman. I am getting to the point of this story. I told her about the threat to the three of us, and I asked her, Carolyn, are you afraid? And remember, this is a 15-year-old girl. She said almost immediately, no, I'm not so much afraid as I am ashamed. And I said, Carolyn, what do you mean you're ashamed? And she said, well, I am ashamed that so many people have suffered so much and done so much for the freedom of my people and all people, and I have done so little. I cannot forget that response of a 15-year-old girl. I just baptized her a year before. She was full of the Spirit, I have to say. But her understanding that the freedom movement, the justice movement that was burgeoning there in the South, especially in the black community, was really God's reach to lift up God's people. And she wanted to be more a part of it, and that desire to pick up her cross and follow Jesus more closely trumped the threat from the Ku Klux Klan. And ever since I have said to myself, if Carolyn Freeman can overcome her fears of the Ku Klux Klan and their threats and follow Jesus a little more closely, pick up the cross if necessary and be ridiculed and laughed at and threatened, then surely I had better be able and willing to do it. And so I pray that Carolyn's example may be an encouragement to all of us to be more willing than ever to pick up our cross and to follow him. And as we come to the Lord's Supper in a moment, remember this is the risen Christ who went to the cross, who bore the cross precisely because he reached out to those at the margins and wanted to show the forgiving love of God that includes all of us. This Christ that comes to us to assure us this morning of that amazing forgiveness that is ours, and to give us the strength to pick up our cross in 2024 and follow him more closely. May it be so. Let the church say amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like if you heard good news and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest message. Peace be with you.